we're going to be Skyping with Coleen Rowley, former FBI special agent. She was a 9/11 whistleblower, and she's done a lot of work talking about very important things, civil liberties. You may recall right after the terrorist attack on 9/11 that there was a report about the FBI agent who had alerted them to the fact that there were people they had a short list. They weren't surveilling everybody in the country. They had a short list of people they were supposed to be following, and one of the things they were supposed to be looking for was the possibility that somebody might want to fly planes and do something with planes. And she said, well, we've got people going to flight school. They want to learn how to fly. They don't want to learn how to land. And that sounds like a problem. And somehow the information wasn't dealt with properly. She's done a lot of work to protect our civil liberties, to promote the cause of peace. She's also done a lot of work, interestingly, if you're Facebook friends with her, you would see this. She does a lot of work explaining why Comey and Mueller and Clapper and Brennan and that whole gang are corrupt. And particularly Mueller and Comey, because she knew them from her FBI days and things that went on there. And she's not the only one that's raised the issue, but it's particularly relevant now, of course, because we have the situation where they're trying to do this, in effect, a coup d'etat against the President of the United States. And Coleen has written and spoken passionately about that. She's also been to Moscow, where she met with Julian Assange, with a group of intelligence agents who work on these sort of things. The veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity, VIPS. Ray McGovern, who we've seen here before, was also one of those people. She was also there. They gave Assange the Sam Adams Award, and Sam Adams, not the Sam Adams from Revolutionary Patriot days, but a more contemporary Sam Adams, who did a lot of work making sure that the intelligence community was giving honest information and to the president and the people that needed the intelligence information, and also that they weren't spying on us as they do now, but that they were doing the work they needed to do against people that were threatening our security. Hi, Coleen. How are you?
Fine.
Great. There you are. Now we see you. Hello. An enthusiastic round of spontaneous applause for you, which is well-deserved. And I just had mentioned to the group that we have a state legislator coming down here who will tell us about some of the legislative happenings in Lansing, including he spearheaded the Fourth Amendment Protection Act. And Coleen, we are the leaders in the country, according to the people at the 10th Amendment Center, in having non-cooperation with NSA and all other federal agencies when they attempt warrantless surveillance. So how about that? That's a great thing. So we're very, very nice of you to take the time to chat with us. In between the Skype calls, I was telling the group here about your history and your heroic background. And there's so many things that we can talk about, as we discussed the other day. In fact, you had that one interview that you posted today about the science of coercion, and that fellow was talking about all the use of propaganda and the psychological tricks, and he stopped at 1960. Which was interesting. But there's so much happening, including the Julian Assange situation. Now, you've been to Moscow and met with Julian, right? With Ray and the other people. Maybe we should start with that. Would you like to talk a little bit about your trip when you met with Julian Assange and what's happening now with the Ecuadorian embassy and all these threats to him and to the freedom of speech?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Actually, in thinking about the Spygate, Trump used the term Spygate in his tweet, lamenting that maybe the FBI had an informant or someone put into his campaign. So if you start thinking about Spygate, that's a lot broader than just what happened with the Trump campaign in 2016, or maybe even a little bit before that. The Snowden revelations were about spying on all Americans. And of course, the reason for the spying on Americans, let me just back up 1 second ago. Spying is supposed to be between countries. So in fact, Russiagate, everybody, the Democrats are so upset about Russiagate, but in fact, Russia spying on the United States and the United States spying on Russia, as well as every other country, even allies, has been going on for hundreds of years. That's actually the way it's supposed to be, where countries spy on each other. And they actually do that to get leverage. They use it, it's part of their soft power. It sounds euphemistic, but it's part of their soft power in order to get leverage in diplomacy. And so, we shouldn't be outraged about Russiagate. We should just consider it the norm. And if we want, our spying is the same way, unless someone wants to get rid of all spying. Okay, so that's kind of the backdrop. But there's something far, far worse than foreign countries spying on us and us spying on foreign countries, which is our own government unconstitutionally spying on Americans. And if you didn't know this was happening, there were NSA whistleblowers even before Edward Snowden. They were facing jail time. Thomas Drake faced 35 years of jail time for having disclosed that Bush turned on the lever to spy on all Americans right after 9/11, when they thought they had the chance and the opportunity. So the problem with this kind of spying is the reason for this is to manipulate and coerce and control the Americans in different ways. And it also didn't just start before 9/11. J. Edgar Hoover was a master of this spying, and he had more dirt on every important political figure in Washington, D.C. than anyone, and in fact was considered the most powerful person in Washington, D.C. because he did have this dirt on everyone from Eleanor Roosevelt to Albert Einstein to every senator, etc. And so there is precedent for our government spying. There's something now, this is even, maybe, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Because now there are private companies, sometimes they're in league with a government service, and sometimes they're just acting on their own. And the most recent ones were the Cambridge Analytica in Great Britain, and also Black Cube in Israel. And, there's some possible information theory that these were actually also aligned with intelligence agencies, that Cambridge Analytica was aligned with some of the British intelligence, and Black Cube is aligned with Mossad. Okay, just guess that because these are the ones that have made the public, this is the tip of the iceberg. And almost every single day there is a story out about how, because Americans are on social media, on Facebook and Google and YouTube, etc., and then they have networks. Everybody has a network of friends. Every single day there's almost a new article out about how a private company has vacuumed up, swept up all of this information about people and their friends in order to somehow use that information, exploit it for their own benefit. So this Science of Coercion was an old film, and there are some other old ones too. But if you go all the way back to the 1920s, 1930s, Edward Bernays had this idea that he would figure out how he could get people to do what he wanted, and by using nice psychological, emotional-based things, he figured out how to do propaganda. He's kind of considered the father of propaganda. He got women that didn't smoke all excited to learn how to smoke by just watching important women walk down the street smoking. He planted the idea in their heads, and he got a lot of women smoking. But that was just one little example. Well, government entities as well as private companies have picked up on this, and so they want people to either buy their product or use their service, and or in the terms of in the government, they want us to continue the war warfare state. And so they don't want what happened during Vietnam, where people got mad and went in the street and protested, etc. They want to keep people manipulated and for bombing foreign countries or demonizing Russia, demonizing China, demonizing Iran, all of these. I don't even know. Our enemy list now is so extensive in the world, even now to even almost include some of our former allies, that it's almost ridiculous. And so for Americans to continue to go along with this is really stupid. But to a large extent they are. It's pretty propaganda. I think if we have to understand, maybe libertarians are a little better. I would hope that there are more critical-minded people that don't always fall for this emotional propaganda. But unfortunately, if you check the polls, a lot of Americans do fall for it. And it's really the worst form of liberty, of losing your liberty, because we have freedom to speak and freedom to freedom against coerced confessions, etc. But this is almost a freedom to think. When they're trying to manipulate your mind by planting ideas and by gathering private information on you so they are better able to target you, when there are false personas on social media out there constantly with their little tricky endeavors. I know Dennis is on Facebook with me, and we kind of see some of these things from time to time. But when you see these really good efforts at propaganda, it's scary, because what they're trying to do is take away your freedom to even think, let alone speak and act, etc. They're taking away your freedom to think and make us all into like little zombies. And so that when Big Brother stands up in the screen and tells us something, that we all just say, yeah, great, go ahead. The other component of this is political campaigns. And political campaigns work wonderful with propaganda. And the reason for that is because political campaigns already have a tribalism. They already are imbued with a groupthink and tribalism. If you join a party, it's kind of like you're saying, okay, anything that you hold out for me, I will go along with, because it's my loyalty to my party is number one.
Wait a minute. Excuse me, Coleen?
Yes.
You're kidding. They would actually do that?
Yeah, even to vote in Minnesota, we're one of the states in Minnesota that has the best. I think we are one of the best equipped for independent people that don't want to subscribe to a party. But for instance, to go to a caucus or a convention, when you come in, you're supposed to sign that you're loyal to that party. Now, the good thing about Minnesota is that we don't have to register on a party. So when we vote in the primary, we can only vote on one party. We can't vote for both, but we at least don't have to register. So we're not profiled in that way. And I think that's at least something that's good. But they want party loyalty. And so the party, what is it now in the United States? 30% or so of us are not affiliated with a party anymore. And I think that number is maybe growing a little bit. I actually am for independent critical thinking, and I think that the tribalism that goes with parties is a problem. But in any event, what I was trying to say was that the propaganda and this endeavor to get dirt on the other candidate opponent, and then to get votes by putting out the dirt at an opportune time. I mean, it's really it means that the issues don't matter in a way. It really means that this is nothing but a big game. But we've been doing this for some time. The difference in the last 5 years or so is we got maybe 10 years, we've got big private companies like Cambridge, like Black Cube, like the others, and they are spying on people in order to try to figure out what will work to manipulate them, in order to get them in sync with either a party or a candidate. And I think even worse is to get them in sync with the warfare the United States NATO-Israel warfare state, which wants nothing but perpetual war. So that's, I really didn't want to say too much more, except that Spygate is a good term in a way, but it's a lot broader than what most people are thinking of it as. It's a lot. It's really the more accurate description than Russiagate. It's much more accurate than Russiagate, but it's much broader, and it means that they're trying to take away our ability to think for ourselves. And the media, I forgot to mention the media. Of course, everyone knows the media is bought and sold on this thing, and so they are just fulfilling the orders here, and they don't allow any kind of dissent or critical thinking. They are part and parcel of this manipulation. So if people have a question, I'd be happy to talk about it. The latest news is Comey is getting Comey is getting criticized. It was just on the news tonight by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice for not following the DOJ advice. And I kind of think about this. I'm not a fan at all of Comey. I criticized him and Mueller both, but this particular criticism of not following a superior's advice, I'm thinking that's probably not the worst thing he's ever done. In my opinion, the other things that he's done in his career have been worse than that. And in some cases, you would want people not to follow the advice, because Loretta Lynch, who was his boss, is also being criticized as having met Clinton on the tarmac and then not recusing herself. And so if you think about it, he shouldn't have followed Loretta Lynch's advice, because she was already doing bad things. So it's pretty darn difficult. But anyways, they're both falling in for criticism now. And that's funny in a way, because everybody has been putting Comey on a pedestal, and now he's going to be criticized for having made comments about Hillary Clinton 11 days before the election.
Right. Well, and I had mentioned earlier during the introduction, again, while you weren't on the Skype yet, the bad record of Comey and Mueller and these other people, and how you've called them out, and you had personal experience dealing with Mueller, and you pointed out things that Comey and Mueller had done which were wrong, and other people have pointed out Comey, Mueller, and Clapper, and Brennan, and frankly, it's an outrage that those four are not hauled up on charges over the things they've done, the lies they've told to Congress, the things they've done to the American people, and this sort of thing. But so here's a question I wanted to ask you and see if we could delve into this a little bit, Coleen. And you mentioned these groups, like Cambridge Analytica, and I think the Black Cube thing is particularly interesting and worrisome. The Black Cube, these ex-Mossad people who apparently had been hired, that organization, by Harvey Weinstein, to besmirch and threaten and intimidate the women that were accusing him of sexual assault, essentially, that they had been hired apparently by somebody, and it's not clear yet exactly who did the hiring, but they were going after people like Trita Parsi and others. There's another fellow, Ben Rhodes, I think is his name. I think he was in the Obama administration. And Trita Parsi is the president of the National Iranian American Council, and was working as an advocate for lowering the tensions with Iran over what our friend Gareth Porter calls the manufactured crisis, about what Sheldon Richman calls the non-existent nuclear weapons program, and the people that all knew it was non-existent. But now you have this, apparently these ex-foreign government agents who, because of their status, will not be held in maybe some of the same legal jeopardy as would a domestic person. And they're being used to smear or Americans who are working at reducing tensions and getting out honest information and that sort of thing, reducing the threat of war, and also overturning U.S. government policy in a very surreptitious manner. And this seems particularly problematic, and I wondered what some of your thoughts might be on that, and the threat that a group like this could pose to somebody like Trita Parsi or Ben Rhodes or any of us, particularly if people didn't realize it was going on. What do you think about that?
Well, these ex-intelligence agents make very good spies. If they go to work for private companies, and the reason is they were trained. John Kiriakou, the former CIA agent who was the whistleblower on torture, said that the CIA actually hires people with some psychopathic talents. Okay, so these things are the ability to read other people. Okay, so if you're trying to recruit spies as a CIA agent, you have to be able to quickly figure out what makes that person tick, and then you try to use whatever you figure out about that person then to get them to flip on your side. And so these skills are translate very, very well for trying to, be an undercover. Essentially, it's an undercover or a false persona that is approaching people and pretending to be something they're not. So in the case of Ben Rhodes, I think it was Ben Rhodes' assistant, his wife was on the internet, and she gets approached by someone who says, I take an interest in you because of the school your child goes to. So all of a sudden she gets messages from somebody who's claiming that they are interested in helping support her child's elementary school. Okay, and so she get email back once or twice, and whatever. So this is the type of kind of very deep spying on people, pretending to be something, trying to get dirt on other people. And these former intelligence people, of course, are going to be scooped up and hired by these private companies. The bad thing is, even if one of these private companies goes under, now that it gets found out, what'll happen, it'll be like Blackwater. It'll change its name, it'll reconfigure, it's still out there operating. I would almost bet with any, I would bet a lot that the Israeli former Mossad people are still out there doing this, only they're not calling themselves Black Cube. There's a whole brand new thing out there doing the same thing. And as long as it's really a problem, because before it gets exposed, it can operate, it can do a lot of damage. Now, what people are going to do is people are going to become very, very cautious. And especially if you are a public figure and you are, involved in things, you're going to probably almost become cautious to the point of becoming paranoid. And this is actually what Hoover did to people. Hoover made people in Washington, D.C. paranoid. He would just have to walk in the room and give them a look, and these people would tremble, thinking that he knew something about them. And so I think this is what's going to happen. We're going to have more and more mistrust. It's bad as it is already, but these spy outfits, private spying outfits, and especially on public figures, there's a certain amount of schadenfreude. When Snowden came out and told everyone that the government was spying on him, and people said, well, I don't have anything to hide. I'm a nobody, you're listening to me talk to my mother-in-law, who cares? And so people, this was the argument that was made. The public figures were the ones making that argument. The public figures, the Washington, D.C. elites were the ones saying, oh, don't listen to Edward Snowden. I heard Dianne Feinstein say this in a committee. I actually heard, I want to say it was the FBI officials saying, don't worry, we're just listening into terrorists. You have nothing to hide, blah, blah, blah. The funny thing is, now this has actually been turned on the Washington, D.C. elites. The FBI, look at even Strzok and Page, the two FBI lovers. Did they think their texts would become public? That somebody would be scooping them up and they would all become public? There's no privacy, and it's bad for the average American, but it's a lot worse if you're a public figure. If you're a politician, if you're a director of an agency, these are the people that should have cracked down on it right from the start, because it has all been turned on them. And they should have realized, I was one of the people who tried to make that argument, because I knew that they were the people with power that could rein it in. In fact, they refused to do it. The latest one who refused to do it was Nunes. And Nunes was complaining about the spying on the Trump campaign. campaign, and yet he voted to continue the government spying. So they have to understand that they are the ones being targeted too. Nunes is, you know what, I'll bet you anything Nunes has been spied on by now. So they really have to realize that this whole spying thing is got to be reined in, and that we can't have democracy. We need freedom to think. We need freedom to speak. And if going back, I'm just going to say one more thing about Julian Assange, because freedom of the press and freedom to speak, he's been now muzzled completely in the Ecuador embassy. He has not been allowed to speak for, I think, it's at least 2 months, 3 months. It's a long time. And he could be facing, some kind of, he is facing an indictment, so he can't leave. The question is, will Ecuador hand him over? And there's been a lot of talk about how the new Ecuador leader is about ready to hand him over. So the other media in our country, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're all applauding this. They did not like the fact that WikiLeaks was too truthful and competed with them and forced them in some cases to print honest, truthful stories based on documents. They didn't like that. They prefer to do transcriptions from the government and to curry their relationships with important officials. They don't like actually listening. They don't even like listening to whistleblowers, the New York Times or whatever, unless it's something that's already with their agenda. And WikiLeaks was really being a nuisance to them. So unfortunately, the taking down of WikiLeaks, they don't understand this. The New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, it's the beginning of the end for freedom of the press. And so they all should be fighting this tooth and nail. And unfortunately, I don't see them doing that.
No, right, they're not doing that. And a very interesting point that you had made earlier about Nunes and that whole group. The FISA renewal was going on. They knew what was happening with the spying on the Trump campaign, and they didn't like it. They'd seen that memo. They still voted for the FISA renewal, and it shows you really how hypocritical these people are. And Nunes' record actually previous to that was pretty bad, though he said some good stuff about the FISA thing after the Trump thing came out and this attempted coup, and a lot of information coming out there. But also something else that's, and as you point out, I mean, there are a few people that are getting out this information, in the alternative media. Our next talk is going to be by Shane Trejo, who's our local 10th Amendment Center person and one of our people that are in Campaign for Liberty, talking about social media censorship and suppression of information. But this is such a widespread problem, as you mentioned, Coleen. And here's Assange, and it was Snowden that you went to see in Moscow. That's right, because he was there, and Assange is in London in that embassy over there. But they're clearly trying to get rid of this guy. And as many people point out, you point out, and Glenn Greenwald and others, it was Assange and it was Snowden that were getting up the information. They've never been refuted on anything that they came out with, whereas the mainstream media is shown to be wrong repeatedly on a serial basis, 24/7, and so that's really bad. Now, something else that's interesting is it looks like more and more, and people are, and there was a great editorial, I think, by former ambassador to Russia, the former ambassador Matlock, looking at the Russiagate hysteria, and he went through the whole thing, and pretty much everything they tried to say about Trump-Russia collusion, there's no evidence at best, and at worst, it's already been disproven, so it's all nonsense. But there has been foreign collusion, but it hasn't been Russian collusion. But the campaign promoting this Russia hysteria has great danger for everyone, because at a certain point, and they drive policies this way, and my wife was saying, we were talking about, sometimes it seems like maybe President Trump was trying too hard to prove that he's not in Putin's pocket. And as Greenwald and others have said, well, if he was a Russian agent, he'd be the worst Russian agent ever. Because he said a lot of great stuff during the campaign, and now, man, the relations are really bad. And here, Jeremy Scahill, you probably saw The Intercepted. He's showing all the different foreign collusion. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, and actually having meetings with Eric Prince and this George Nader fellow. and some other people, and there is stuff going on, and you look at our foreign policy and the weapons sales and everything else, and the contacts between these groups, and the switch from the administration's position pre-election to after inauguration on some of these things, it makes your head spin. So there really is a problem with foreign collusion, but it's not the one the media is talking about, and I know that you'll be stunned to hear that. It's amazing that this would ever happen. But nonetheless, it's a real problem that we're facing, and so it looks like something needs to be done about it. I'm not sure what it is, other than people ought to be raising real hue and cry. And I guess now, of course, Caitlin Johnstone and others, and yourself, and Roger Waters just at his concert, right? He just said something about Assange. So this seems to be a very important thing, that we need to all do what we can to protect Julian Assange, because if they take him down, that's a huge linchpin from their standpoint in getting rid of the free flow of information, even in the alternative media area, right?
That's exactly right, because there's no real distinction between what WikiLeaks published and what the New York Times published, for instance, in the Pentagon Papers, etc. There's no distinction there. And the fact is, they're trying to make WikiLeaks tied to a foreign, like to Russia, without any proof at all. And so that's once this happens, they can go after any media, a story that they don't like, whatever. If someone was to leak the Pentagon paper type thing, they could go after them. There'd be nothing to stop them. So if we don't really have to fight for WikiLeaks, I think at this time, we can always hope that there could be more WikiLeaks. We don't need to stop WikiLeaks. We need to actually get more very brave, courageous press people out there willing to publish things and go up against the power.
Yes. Now, another thing that came out about leaks, I think we have a little bit of delay here on the thing there, but you mentioned John Kirikow earlier, and his work revealing the CIA torture program, and as somebody pointed out, there were crimes committed. Somebody shone a light on it. Somebody blew the whistle. And Kirikow goes to jail, goes to prison. One of the participants, and allegedly a participant in destroying the evidence of the crimes, is now the head of the CIA. And so we have a real problem here. And even, of course, as Ray McGovern and others point out, torture is wrong. It's morally wrong. It's also against United States law. And President Reagan was outspoken about this, as was George Washington way back then. It's against international law. And yet, it doesn't work. It's particularly useful if you want to get false statements or propaganda statements, but not actual apparently information that can be used, and they have a number of people who have testified as to that and proven that, apparently. So, and I know you're very active in that area too, with tackling torture at the top and other things, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are as to what we can do to fight the torture regime, and to point out also that all of these techniques, including the torture, are used against people who are accused of something, not been on trial, not proven guilty, but they use torture to try to get a confession from somebody on things. And what are your thoughts on how we can fight that?
It's too complicated for the short time I have, but the FBI was really the only agency that had expertise in actually interviewing and interrogating suspects, and most of our best agent interviewers were very good at in a way they had to feign that they were friendly with the subject. It was the opposite of torture, by the way, because you're pretending to empathize. That's really the thing here. Is you're empathizing maybe with a child killer. Okay, our agents, we had some agents that actually could do this. They could get a subject of a guy who had killed a child to lead them to the body because they were able to empathize. Now, if they had tried to torture the information out, it would have been just the opposite. So, when this happened, one of our FBI agents who was in the room when the CIA approached and said, "Oh, we're going to take the gloves off. We have these contractors that know how to reduce people to helplessness, and somehow when we terrorize them and reduce them to helplessness, that'll be good." The only thing torture is good for is for concocting false intelligence. The Salem witch trials, the Inquisition, what Stalin did, to get confessions from people that he could say that, oh, well, they confessed that they were communists, or they confessed that they were spies or whatever. So in the case of after 9/11, they were using torture to try to get this lie that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11. And two of the people they tortured actually, said, "Oh, Saddam has chemical weapons, biological weapons, etc." They lied because they were being tortured. Then Dick Cheney stood up and said, "Aha!" And Colin Powell at the UN stood up and said, "We have intelligence that Saddam has these weapons of mass destruction." This came from torture. So when people say it works, it doesn't work. It works to get false confessions. Yes, it works to get false confessions, if that's what you want. These people were trying to concoct a lie to go to war in Iraq, and it worked in the sense of getting some of those lies. But it does not work. It does not work to get good information from people. And so the only way that you get good information from people is by building rapport and empathizing with them. And in some cases, it's not possible, and reducing people to helplessness is not going to work as a rule. And it's sad because now we're at the stage where it hasn't been totally made illegal. Internationally, countries out there now in the UN, one of the UN investigators, the International Court investigator, Bensouda, and I think the EU, the European Union, they have all investigated it, and they're going after parts of what the United States has done. So we haven't faced any accountability. We've all covered it up in the United States, but in the world right now, and it's the leading recruiting tool for terrorists is to point to the United States and say, look what they did. They tortured black sites, Guantanamo. It's the leading recruitment for extremists, terrorists, ISIS, etc. So we've really shot ourselves in the foot, and yet these officials, you saw it with Haspel nomination, and you saw the Democrats all voting to confirm Haspel, and not all of them, but a certain number of them did. Warner did. The hypocrisy is incredible, and so we are gonna continue to see more bad results. There always is consequences and blowback for violating these kind of real universal principles that have stood the test of time, like due process. Anybody who thinks they can get rid of due process and now have military commissions and just charge people and never insider threats and all these things that they're doing and not have any consequences for it is greatly mistaken. This is all blowing back in different ways, and it's leading to a form of chaos and anarchy here in the United States. This was what the famous thing by Justice Brandeis, when the government becomes the wrongdoer, it breeds anarchy because everybody's looking at these top levels, and this is their example and their model. So the blowback now is that people are not going to be following the law, and they're just going to be taking the law into their own hands. Mass shooters, all these really bad consequences that are not being connected to the wars and the lies that have sustained the wars.
Okay, well, Coleen, we really appreciate your time. There's even more we could talk about, like the drone warfare and the problems from that, and all these interventions around, But I guess we're out of time now, but I want to thank you very much. You certainly build empathy with us with your knowledge and your understanding and your dedication to these very important principles. And as you say, in the group here in this room, including those that run for political office within a political party, the thing that ties everybody here together is putting principle first. And it's our duty as human beings, it's our duty as Americans, and that's what everybody here does. And we appreciate everything you've done. So ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Coleen Rowley. She truly is an American hero.
Keep up the good work for liberty, because if we don't keep really trying, we're going to lose it.
Oh, okay. Oh, we have one question here. I guess somebody... Yeah. Oh, Michael Shalal. Yeah. Michael, come up by the microphone so she can hear you. You can do that.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for the information. My name is Michael Shalal. I'm running for Michigan State Senate District 10. I also spent 15 years working in the intelligence community. I was a counterintelligence, counterinsurgency analyst, senior intelligence analyst. I've done 5 tours to combat. I've also supported several intelligence departments here in the stateside. I want to first thank you for bringing up the fear-mongering tactic that's actually is being implemented here. Also, I want to talk about the separation between CIA versus FBI, reach and breach. And how do you feel about FISA? How confident are you with the FISA court? I mean, since its inception, since it was signed back in 1978, it was supposed to target foreign intelligence and then kind of conduct surveillance on them nonstop. However, what's been happening is that these tactics are being implemented here domestically on American citizens, and there is no statute for how long they can investigate, and I don't know if you can corroborate that information. I mean, obviously I spent some time, but I'm not as versed as you are when it comes to issues like that. So if you could just tell everybody here, what are we facing, what are we dealing with, and how could they actually put us in surveillance for a long time, just without any suspicions, and those warrantless arrests and such and what have you. Thank you.
Okay, if I understood your question, it's about a little bit about the FISA court. The FISA court was a compromise in 1978 after the Church Committee, because J. Edgar Hoover used to do those kinds of things without any court at all. And so the Church Committee came down on that, and the compromise was that they would go to a secret court, so this stuff would never become public, but you would at least have some judges reviewing it. And as the guy that just, what's his name again? The person who just questioned me?
Michael.
And as Michael just said, when it was instituted, there was a wall between the FISA court usage, which targeted foreign countries. You had to be an agent of a foreign power or of a terrorist group. And so the wall was between regular criminal cases. You couldn't, like if you have a bank robber, you couldn't go to the FISA court and get a secret FISA surveillance to catch the bank robber, because a bank robbery is a normal domestic crime. And that was called the wall. And that existed from 1978 until 2001. And after 9/11, there were 2 or 3 ways that the so-called wall came down. The one way was that the FISA Court of Appeals had an opinion that said the wall should never have grown up this way. We should have sharing between criminal and intelligence. And the other way was that there were executive orders, and the Patriot Act also brought the wall down, because it changed one word in there and brought the wall down. And so 17 years later, after the wall came down, this is the root. You don't hear anyone saying this. I'm going to say it. The root of the problem with the spying on the Trump campaign officials, on who was is it now? Not Roger Stone, the other one. Carter Page. The spying that they went to the FISA court. They didn't tell the exact truth to the FISA court, and they got a year-long warrant to listen into him and listen into everybody talking to him, which was probably a lot of people in the campaign. And that would not have probably occurred had it not been for this wall coming down between domestic and foreign. And so I think that needs to be looked at, but right now we're not even hearing anyone talk about the root cause. As long as they can point to a foreign country like Russia and say, oh, well, these people have Russia ties, you have to be able to prove that a lot more than a specious British spy dossier, this Steele dossier, and that's all they had. And that was one of the main pieces of information. So I would fault the FBI for not having verified the Steele dossier before they went to the FISA court and used it as evidence and proof. That Comey should be, who should be faulted is Comey. Comey was, in charge. He should have verified that before he went. And then, of course, they used it to try to blackmail, leverage Trump a little bit too, or scare him. And so, this is really a problem. The FISA court needs to have a way that they can be more circumspectly used only on foreign intelligence, foreign terrorism, not on domestic law enforcement things.
Okay, and well, that's great information, and that reminds me of one other thing that when you mentioned about the spying, something else that we need to focus on. We don't have time to talk about it, but the attempt to make the AUMF, instead of a declaration of war, have a perpetual AUMF, which will include and codify sections 1021 and 1022 of the 2012 NDAA, meaning we're all subject to potential indefinite detention without charge or trial in perpetuity. This has to be stopped, and particularly when you combine it with this spying and the illicit surveillance. But at least here in Michigan, we did get through the thing where it says the state will not cooperate with warrantless surveillance, so that's something. But ladies and gentlemen, again, and thank you, Micah, that was a great question. A big round of applause for Coleen. What a source of great information. And she's a heroic leader. We look forward to speaking with you subsequently, Coleen. Have a wonderful summer, please.